Eric Herner. After listening to many of your videos and those of other ex-Scientologists, as well as reading a stack of articles on the subject, I've come up with a definition of Scientology which I'd like your thoughts about. Scientology is a belief system based on the assumption that science had reached a certain level of development in the 1960s, which made it possible to develop not just a physical technology, but also a kind of mental technology through which one could affect the mind and personality of a person by ridding him of his subconscious self, the so-called reactive mind. The basis of this road to personal transformation is called auditing and consists of multiple questions techniques monitored by an auditor through the medium of an electric resistor called an e-meter, Scientology's equivalent of Mormon underwear. When, after some years of putting these methods into practice, they were seen not to have any lasting effect on the clients, rather than revise the system, Hubbard began to look for supernatural reasons for the failure, lighting upon the idea of body thetans who are corrupting the human psyche and which, through further auditing, might be eliminated, leading to the desired superhuman powers of the mind. In order to provide some sort of cosmology for how these body thetans came about, Hubbard came up with a bit of science fiction that, quite likely, he knew himself to be just that, namely the whole Xenu narrative, which really explains nothing nor has anything to do with anything even in Scientology. We have, thus, a two-tiered system, the first based on an illusory epistemology which failed to produce results, propped up by a further time and money-consuming series of futile activities based on no logical foundation at all, which have the sole purpose of keeping the money coming in. Okay, thank you, Eric. That's very, there's a lot there. Okay, so, and I basically agree with you on a couple points in terms of the framework you're sort of creating, but there's a lot of details I think you're kind of getting half right. Not totally wrong. I don't really think you said anything there that's completely false. But let's see here. What I want to say is that I think the framework you're making that Hubbard, in terms of a belief system, you said Scientology is a belief system, and it is a belief system. And that belief system is hung on this sort of pseudoscientific approach to solving the problems of the mind, and those problems, being that solution being Dianetics. And when that was seen not to produce the results, like you said, then Hubbard went on with developing Scientology, and that itself became the subject of many, many revisions through the years until he lighted on the confidential information, upper level, advanced information about OT. Rather than clear being the ideal situation to go after a la Dianetics, it became operating thetan. And that actually was first formulated in 1952. The idea of OT. Not the OT levels and not the Xenu narrative, but just the concept of an operating thetan. And that was something that Hubbard sort of played around with for all through the 1950s, clear and OT, that one would receive priority and then the other. You'd kind of bop around on these things. But OT really came into its own in the 1960s. And you mentioned that the thing about body thetans and how this doesn't really connect with anything else in Scientology, and that the cosmology of how these body thetans came about was just science fiction that Hubbard probably knew himself was just science fiction. I'm going to push back on that whole thought, okay? One, body thetans are not disconnected from everything else in Scientology. They're not, like I've mentioned before, and you're probably influencing your definition here. I said that they are not logically consistent. The lower level Scientology materials and the upper level materials don't mesh well together, but they're not completely disrelated. You are introduced to the concept of a thetan very early on, and a body thetan is really just another thetan who's in a particularly screwed up condition and has been for a very long time and requires rehabilitation. And that's what a person is doing when they're addressing body thetans on the OT levels, is they're individually contacting every single one of these thousands of body thetans that are, on or around this person's body, and they are telling them, hey, wake up, buddy. Let's go. time to wake up, and let's take a look at a few things, and let's get you off out of here, right? And that whole process is only supposed to take a couple minutes per body thetan, apparently, because they got, and then this takes just, all this time to get through this. So not totally disconnected. And I don't think that, and also, sorry, the other thing I wanted to say about this is that Markab and the Xenu and the Galactic Confederation, Xenu is not mentioned in the non-confidential lower-level materials, but the Galactic Confederation is, and the Markab Confederacy is, and all kinds of space opera stuff is being thrown around at the lower levels of Scientology, and that also started back in 1952. And all through the 50s and 60s, Hubbard was developing all kinds of strains of science fiction narratives that explain different phenomena in Scientology. And what had Thetans been up to all these years, right? What were they doing? Well, apparently they were flying around in spaceships and getting implanted and running multiple bodies at any one time and having bodies in pawn, where you have a body that you're connected with spiritually, but actually it's under somebody else's control. And they just kind of keep it on ice and wake it up from time to time when they want to give you instructions. Meanwhile, you're here on planet Earth or some other planet running a body, doing your thing, and suddenly you're getting these weird instructions from somewhere else. Well, that's somebody waking up your other body, right? This is all according to a lecture from 1952 called The Role of Earth. One of the most classic science fiction-y kind of Matrix style. Really, there's some crazy stuff in that one. And that's from all the way back in 52. So Hubbard was pushing science fiction narratives really early on in Scientology and continued to push them, like I said, all through the 50s and 60s before he lighted on Xenu and the whole, and his band of loyal officers and all of that. Okay, so that's the only real point of pushback I have on everything you've said there. Otherwise, I think the two-tier system of, like I said, the framework I completely agree with of he created something, it didn't really work, so he built a whole nother thing on top of that, and that didn't really fly, and then he built another thing on top of that. And really, if you were to break Scientology down, you'd probably find about 5, 6, 7 levels of stuff that Hubbard has built on top of other stuff that didn't really totally pan out until he kind of, until you finally have modern Scientology. So anyway, thanks, Eric. I hope my feedback was useful or helpful in some fashion.